Boy in the Box. Joseph Augustus Zarelli was a 4-year-old boy whose tortured and naked body was discovered in a cardboard box along Susquehanna Road in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in February 1957. For decades, the case remained a mystery, earning him the nickname the Boy in the Box. The child had suffered severe physical abuse and showed signs of mutilation. His body had been carefully washed and groomed with freshly cut hair and trimmed nails, yet bore scars from surgical procedures and abuse. The cause of the death was determined to be blunt force trauma, and his body had been placed in a bassinet box wrapped in a blanket. Despite widespread media attention and numerous leads, including forensic facial reconstruction, no one came forward to identify the boy. In 2022, through DNA analysis and genetic testing, police finally identified the child as Joseph Augustus Zarelli. His parents were revealed as Augustus J. Zarelli and Mary Elizabeth Plunkett. While the boy's identity was confirmed, his murder remains an unsolved case, with law enforcement still seeking answers. Joseph's remains now rest in Ivy Hill Cemetery, where his gravestone stands as a reminder of a mystery that puzzled authorities for over 60 years. Grime Sisters. On a December night in 1956, Barbara and Patricia Grimes, who were devoted Elvis Presley fans, left their Chicago home to see his latest movie, Love Me Tender, but little did they know that they would never make it back home. Not until January 22, 1957, their bodies were found frozen near a country road, bearing scars that were eventually dismissed as post-mortem damage. Witnesses reported seeing them after the movie, chatting with a young man looking like Elvis Presley himself. This man was the last person to see them alive. A major suspect, Edward Bedwell, who resembled Elvis Presley, was caught under suspicion. He even gave a confession after a long interrogation, but his account didn't match the autopsy findings, and he later revealed that he was under the false belief that if he confessed, the police would free him. He was freed after a few weeks. Yet, the theories of an Elvis lookalike linked to their disappearance remained, as friends saw the sisters enter a car with someone matching that description. Despite extensive investigations, including a questioning of a whopping 300,000 people, the true criminal couldn't be convicted, and their cause of death was eventually listed as shock and exposure. Keddie Murders. In April 1981, the small town of Keddie, California witnessed a brutal, unsolved crime. Glenna Sue Sharp, a mother of 5 who fled an abusive marriage, was living in a rustic cabin with her children when the unimaginable occurred. On the morning of April 12th, her 14-year-old daughter Sheila discovered a horrifying scene. The bodies of her mother, her 15-year-old brother John, and his friend Dana Wingate, brutally beaten and stabbed in the living room. The cabin was soaked in blood, the walls covered with knife marks, and the murder weapons, a hammer and a knife, were found bent and broken on the floor. Adding to the tragedy, 12-year-old Tina Sharp had vanished without a trace. The crime scene provided few answers. There was no forced entry. The victims were bound and gagged, but there were no signs of assault. Blood spatter analysis indicated that the bodies had been moved, possibly suggesting a sick ritual or staged scene. The violence, such as multiple stabbings, blunt force trauma, and strangulation, implied that more than one killer was involved. But there were no solid leads. Suspicion fell on Martin Smart, a neighbor with a violent history. Smart's wife, Marilyn, had confided in Sue about her abusive marriage, and Sue had reportedly advised her to leave him. The anger that consumed Martin and his friendship with Joe Bo Bubetti, a man with ties to organized crime, made the duo prime suspects. Even more damning, Martin had voluntarily told police about a missing claw hammer, a detail that strangely matched the murder weapon description before it was public knowledge. Then, 3 years after the murders, a shocking discovery was made. The skull and bones of Tina Sharp were found nearly 100 miles away, cementing her as a 4th victim of this tragic massacre. Despite this breakthrough, the case went cold, and the Keddie murders remain unsolved to date. Florence Salon Murders. On November 6, 2001, a customer arrived at the Hair Gallery, a salon in Florence, Montana, off Highway 93. As she parked, she noticed an oddly dressed man in a black coat and possibly a top hat exiting the building. Entering through the back door, she discovered a body lying face down in a pool of blood and immediately called 911. When the police arrived, they discovered 2 more bodies in the nearby utility room. The victims were Brenda Patch, who was giving a manicure to Cynthia Paulus, and salon owner Dorothy Harris, who was killed shortly after arriving. All 3 women had their throats slashed in broad daylight, shocking the small community. Investigators believed that the murders occurred within minutes, and the killer vanished without a trace. Initial theories included drug-related motives, leading to the arrests of drug dealers Brian Weber and Lincoln Benavides in 2008. However, the charges were ultimately dismissed due to insufficient evidence. Both men remain in federal prison for unrelated drug convictions. The case of the Florence Salon murders has now become a cold case, yet has sparked some response from Missoula County's cold case unit. Will the 3 innocent women get justice for their tragic deaths? Or will it continue to be a baffling mystery no one knows? Kendrick Johnson. On January 11, 2013, Kendrick Johnson's body was found inside a vertical wrestling mat at Lowndes High School in Valdosta, Georgia. He was discovered head first, and initial autopsy reports by the Georgia Bureau of Investigation concluded he died from positional asphyxia, ruling his death an accident. Authorities theorized that he fell onto the mat while searching for a shoe, a common practice among students. Dissatisfied with this conclusion, Johnson's family felt the investigation overlooked critical details. They questioned the school's surveillance footage, which had gaps, and the fact that Kendrick was found without shoes. They also noted inconsistencies in witnesses' accounts and raised concerns about previous incidents of bullying Kendrick had faced from other students. In June 2013, a private pathologist hired by the family found evidence of blunt force trauma, contradicting the official findings. This led them to suspect foul play, prompting the U.S. Attorney's Office to open a formal review in October 2013, though no criminal charges were filed by June 2016 due to insufficient evidence. Johnson's family subsequently filed a $100 million civil lawsuit against multiple individuals, alleging a conspiracy to cover up a murder involving students, including sons of an FBI agent. The lawsuit was later withdrawn, resulting in a judge ordering the Johnsons to pay $292,000 in legal fees. Despite subsequent investigations, including one reopened in 2021, the conclusion remained that Johnson's death was a tragic accident, with no evidence of homicide or conspiracy. Chandra Levy. Chandra Ann Levy was an American intern at the Federal Bureau of Prisons in Washington, D.C., who disappeared in May 2001. Her skeletal remains were discovered in Rock Creek Park in May 2002, leading to a highly publicized murder investigation. The case drew intense media attention, particularly due to her affair with Congressman Gary Condit, which complicated the investigation. Levy was last seen on May 1, 2001, and her parents reported her missing 5 days later. Initial police efforts were stopped by miscommunications and a focus on her relationship with Condit rather than potential leads, including a man named Igmar Gwandik, who had a history of assault in the same area. After persistent pressure from media outlets and investigative reports, Gwandik was arrested in 2009 and convicted of Levy's murder in 2010. His conviction relied heavily on circumstantial evidence, including his history of violence. However, he was granted a new trial in 2015, and prosecutors opted not to pursue the case further, instead seeking his deportation to El Salvador. West Memphis. In 1993, West Memphis, Arkansas became the scene of a tragedy that continues to haunt the community. 3 8-year-old boys, Stevie Branch, Christopher Byers, and Michael Moore, were brutally murdered, their bodies discovered in a drainage ditch, stripped of clothing and bound. The crime scene suggested a horrific act of violence, with one victim showing signs of mutilation. All fingers immediately pointed to Damian Eccles, Jason Baldwin, and Jesse Miskelly Jr. Their arrest followed a flawed investigation that was completely led by community bias and the sensational specter of satanic ritual. Eccles, an outsider known for his love of heavy metal and Wicca, became a prime target for law enforcement, accused of leading the alleged cult-like killing. Miskelly, with an intellectual disability, was interrogated for hours without his parents or legal counsel. Under pressure, he delivered a confused confession filled with contradictions that became a cornerstone of the prosecution's case. Despite a lack of physical evidence tying them to the murders, Eccles received the death penalty, while Baldwin and Miskelly were sentenced to life. Over the years, new DNA testing cleared the trio of guilt, revealing no match to the evidence collected. In 2011, they accepted an Alford plea, proclaiming their innocence while acknowledging that the prosecution had sufficient evidence for a conviction. Despite their release, the true killer remains a mystery, leaving the justice of 3 innocent kids pending under the sky of West Memphis. Who, if anyone, will ever be held accountable for the horrific deaths of Stevie, Christopher, and Michael? Jill Dando. On the morning of April 26, 1999, Jill Dando, a well-known British broadcaster, set out from her friend's home in Chiswick and returned to her house in Fulham. At 37 years old, she was in the process of selling the property and didn't visit often. On this particular day, she was there to collect contract documents sent by her agent, John Roseman. As she approached her front door, Dando was attacked from behind. The assailant forced her to the ground near the porch step and fatally shot her. A neighbor, Helen Doble, discovered a body about 14 minutes later and called the authorities. The investigation that followed, named Operation Oxborough, drew immense media attention. Police interviewed over 2,500 people and took more than 1,000 statements. But progress was slow. They initially focused on Barry George, a man with a history of stalking and other offenses who lived nearby. George was arrested and convicted in 2001, but his conviction was later overturned due to inadequate evidence, leading to his release in 2008. Some believed a jealous ex-boyfriend was the reason, while others thought it was a professional assassin or even a deranged fan. Dando's brother, Nigel, believed her death was the act of an opportunist seeking fame, but none of these theories have been confirmed yet. Rebecca Zahau. Rebecca Maui Zahau was a Burmese-American woman found hanging at her boyfriend's beach house in Coronado, California on June 13, 2011. Her death occurred 2 days after the critical injury of 6-year-old Max Shackney, the son of her boyfriend, Jonah Shackney. Rebecca and her younger sister, Zena, were the only known individuals present when Max fell from a staircase. The San Diego Sheriff's Office ruled Rebecca's death a suicide, while Max's was deemed an accident. This conclusion was disputed by Zahau's family, who filed a $10 million wrongful death lawsuit against Jonah's brother, Adam Shackney. The civil trial resulted in a $5 million judgment for Zahau's family, recognizing their loss. Rebecca Zahau, born in Burma, moved to the US about 10 years before her death. She worked as an ophthalmic technician and had a troubled past, including a shoplifting arrest. On the day of her death, Zahau was found hanging from a balcony with her wrists and ankles tied. A message that read, "She saved him. Can he save her?" was painted on a door, raising further questions about her death. Although police initially ruled it a suicide, a second autopsy suggested something else, leaving doubts about the realities surrounding her tragic end. Karina Holmer. Karina Holmer, a 19-year-old woman from Sweden, was found murdered in Boston after a night out with friends in July 1996. Having won $1,500 in the lottery, she moved to the US to work as an au pair. After arriving in South Boston, she settled into a basement apartment and cared for 2 children while exploring her new surroundings and making new friends. On July 21st, during the summer solstice celebrations, Karina went to the theater district with friends, where she became heavily intoxicated and was last seen around midnight at the Zanzibar nightclub. The next day, her body was discovered in a dumpster behind an apartment building, mutilated and identified by friends. The cause of her death was determined to be strangulation, further confirmed by the ligature marks on her neck. The police believed her killer had familiarity with the area, as the crime's nature suggested a personal motive. Investigators looked into her host family, but they remained uncooperative, raising suspicions about the father, Frank Rapp, and the possibility of a secret relationship with Karina. Despite the passage of time, Homer's true criminal was never found.